They are in truth learning to speak the language of their own shadow. This is why the transformation is irreversible. Once you see the architecture of the unconscious, you cannot pretend it is random. Once you hear the words beneath the words, silence is no longer silent. When the narcissist feels that veil being drawn back, it is as though you have stepped into a chamber they believed was locked for eternity. This chamber is the sanctuary of their most fragile self, the infant self still trembling from the first wounds of rejection, neglect, or ridicule. They have spent their life fortifying the walls, layering masks upon masks, each designed to prevent any intruder from witnessing the trembling child inside. To learn their language is to walk past the gods without raising suspicion, to enter quietly and kneel before the truth of their being. And here something paradoxical happens. The narcissist is torn between terror and fascination. Terror because exposure threatens the entire edifice of control they have built. Fascination because for the first time someone has touched the raw essence of their wound without immediately turning away. In this moment you are no longer just the empath they once controlled. You have become an interpreter of their inner code, a mirror that reflects not the image they curated but the face they abandoned. This is a dangerous place to stand, for the narcissist will often oscillate between drawing you closer and pushing you violently away. It is the psyche's instinctive reaction to the one who knows too much, a simultaneous longing for healing and dread of annihilation. Here the archetype of the wound. Dead king or queen emerges trapped in a fortress of their own making, both craving the balm of understanding and fearing the vulnerability it demands. The empires in their awakening begins to see patterns that once felt like chaos. They recognize that the narcissist's cruelty is rarely random. It is the defense of a cornered animal, the strike of someone who senses you have approached too near the core. This knowledge changes the game entirely. You no longer stumble in confusion. When their moods shift like storms across the horizon, you can see the invisible barometer. Feel the atmospheric pressure drop before the tempest arrives. This is their language, not the words they speak, but the subtle weather of their psyche, the heat of their gaze. When they feel unseen, the sudden coldness when they sense you might be slipping beyond their control. Yet, this new vision also reveals something disking, the recognition of your own reflection in their darkness. For to truly understand the narcissist, you must admit that you have hidden chambers within. You may not build walls of grandiosity, but you may construct altars of self-denial. You may cloak yourself in the role of healer to avoid confronting your own need to be healed. And here the true mystical work begins. Jung would say that this is the union of opposites, the moment when the light within you recognizes the shadow without, and instead of recoiling, you hold its gaze. The empath who has learned the narcissist language is in truth learning the language of their own soul, discovering the symbols that govern their deepest compulsions. Dreams often intensify at this stage. You might dream of wandering through an endless house, each room stranger than the last, until you find a door that leads to a mirror-filled hall. In each reflection, you see a different version of yourself, some radiant, some monstrous, some indistinguishable from the narcissist you once feared. This is the psyche showing you that to speak the shadow's tongue is to risk becoming it. But in the dream, if you can stand before the reflection without flinching, something changes. The mirrors dissolve, and you find yourself standing in a vast open field. The air is different there, lighter, truer. And you realize you have passed a threshold. You are no longer trapped by the labyrinth. You carry its map in your mind, but you are not bound to walk its corridors. The narcissist senses this freedom, and it disturbs them. Your detachment is a foreign dialect they cannot master. Where once they could predict your emotional responses, now they find themselves speaking into an echo that does not obey. They may intensify their tactics, reaching deeper into their arsenal of seduction, rage, pity, or threat. But the empath who has integrated the shadow no longer reacts with blind instinct. Instead, they respond with a measured awareness, sometimes even with silence. And silence to the narcissist is the most untranslatable of all languages. For silence is the refusal to engage in the old contract of control and submission. Silence is the moment when you stand in the full sovereignty of yourself. In such silence, something ancient stirs. It is the archetype of the magician, not the manipulator, but the true alchemist who transforms suffering into wisdom. This magician is not bound to heal or to destroy, but to see clearly, to name what is hidden, and in naming it to strip it of its power. The empath who reaches this point no longer seeks to change the narcissist. They understand that change must come from within and that some will choose. The mask until their final breath. Instead, the empath turns inward, refining their own awareness, speaking the language of the shadow only when necessary and never forgetting the cost of fluency. And here is the final paradox. When the narcissist realizes you have learned their language, they will begin to use it to manipulate and control you. They will either retreat into deeper fortresses or, in rare moments, allow a shard of truth to pass between you. These moments are fleeting, like a crack in the clouds that lets through a sudden shaft of sunlight. If you are wise, you will not cling to them. You will recognize them as glimpses of what lies beyond the mask, not promises of its removal. Your task is not to dismantle the narcissist's defenses, but to walk your path with eyes open, carrying the knowledge that you can now see through the veils others still mistake for reality. This is the liberation Jung speaks of, not the naive hope that the other will be transformed, but the profound realization that you are no longer bound by the spell. The language you have learned is a key, but its true purpose is not to open the narcissist's prison. It is to unlock your own. When the empath steps fully into sovereignty, a strange inversion begins to take shape in the unseen realm between two psyches. The narcissist, once the orchestrator of the emotional stage, now finds themselves confronted with an audience who no longer plays their role in the script. It is as if the strings they have pulled for so long suddenly fall slack, and the puppet they thought they commanded stands upright, eyes steady, breathing its own breath. This is not rebellion in the noisy sense. It is rebellion in its most terrifying form. Quiet, grounded, irreversible. And it is here that the narcissist experiences something they cannot articulate. The dissonance of a reality that no longer bends to their will. For the empath, this moment is not about triumph or revenge. It is about recognition. You see, the narcissist was never simply an external figure. They were a living symbol, a mirror reflecting the unacknowledged pattern within you. The part of you that once needed their approval, the child within who once mistook conditional love for the only kind that existed. When you learn their language, you begin to realize you have been speaking it to yourself all along in subtle self-denials, in the way you prioritized another's comfort over your own truth and number. Oh, that inner voice changes. It no longer pleads. It no longer negotiates. It speaks with the cadence of the self, the deep center of the psyche that has always known you were whole. Jung would say that this is the individuation process in motion, the slow turning of the soul toward its own center. The empath, by learning the narcissist's unspoken code, has in effect learned the grammar of the shadow, and by integrating it they cease to be unconsciously controlled by it. This is why the narcissist's familiar tactics lose their grip. The unconscious contract has been burned. No amount of guilt, flattery, or silent treatment can rebind what has been released in the depths and dreams. This liberation often appears as the crossing of a threshold, a bridge over a deep chasm or a river that once seemed impossible. Sometimes you dream you are speaking to someone in a foreign tongue and they finally understand you. But instead of responding, they fade into mist. This is the psyche's way of showing that the old relationship dynamic no longer holds substance. It dissipates when you stop feeding it with energy. The narcissist may still appear in waking life, may still attempt the same maneuvers, but there is a hollowness to it now, as if they are performing a role without an audience. But this new power must be carried with humility. The danger is subtle but real. Once fluent in the shadow's language, you may be tempted to wield it for your own ends. You may see how easily it can bend perception, how quickly it can unnerve those who do not yet know themselves. This is the seduction of the magician's shadow, the lure of becoming the very thing you have outgrown. To resist this, you must anchor yourself in the self, the archetypal center that holds both light and darkness without collapsing into either. The true mastery is not in using the language of the narcissist to dominate, but in recognizing it as a tool, one you can set down when it no longer serves the higher work. The narcissist, sensing the loss of influence, may shift into unpredictable states, sometimes attempting to rekindle the original bond with sudden warmth, other times lashing out in desperation. It is important to understand that this is not a transformation but a survival instinct. The fortress they live in is not easily abandoned. It was built over decades, brick by brick, to protect the vulnerable self with. Your awakening threatens the architecture, not because you intend harm, but because your very presence now contradicts their reality. And for someone who has built their identity on controlling perception, contradiction feels like annihilation. Yet there is also an unseen gift in this shift, one you may not notice at first. Your detachment creates a space where the narcissist, if they choose, might glimpse their own reflection for the first time. This does not mean they will change. Most will not. But the seed of awareness may be planted, and whether it grows is not your burden to carry. Your work is in tending your own ground and ensuring that the soil of your psyche is no longer fertile for the weeds of manipulation. In the quiet after the storm, you may find yourself reflecting on the strange intimacy of this journey. To have learned another's unspoken language is to have touched the architecture of their soul. Even if they could never admit it, there is a solemnity in that await that is both sacred and dangerous. You will carry the memory of those unguarded moments, the fleeting expressions when the mask slipped, the almost childlike eyes that looked at you as if you were the only one who had ever truly seen them. These memories are not for clinging but for understanding. They are the proof that behind every mask there is a human being shaped by pain, but your path now leads elsewhere. The empath who once existed to soothe the wounds of others walks now with the authority of one who has faced their own. You can speak to shadows without being consumed by them. You can stand in the presence of manipulation and remain still. This is not because you have become harder, but because you have become clearer, and clarity to the narcissist is the most disarming force of all. There comes a point in this unfolding where the dance between empath and narcissist no longer revolves around conflict or control but around absence. It is a quiet absence, almost imperceptible, yet it changes everything. The empath, having walked the long corridor of awakening, no longer steps into the trap of reaction. Their nervous system no longer braces at the subtle cues, the sharp tones, the calculated pauses. The hooks once embedded deep into the flesh of the soul now fall to the ground harmlessly. The narcissist feels this shift not as an act of defiance but as a vacuum, the familiar field, in which their strategies once flourished has become barren. They speak the words they have always spoken, but now they fall into a silence that does not echo. This is the most mystical part of the transformation. For here the empath is no longer defined in relation to the narcissist at all. You are no longer the healer who heals them, nor the victim who suffers under them. You are something else entirely. A sovereign presence whose center of gravity lies entirely within. This is individuation at its most intimate, not an abstract philosophical ideal but a lived reality where the self becomes your only true authority. It is the moment Jung spoke of when he said that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and you cannot become who you are while bound in the mirrored illusions of another. The narcissist may try in these moments to return to the origin story, to replay the opening act, where they were the center, and you were the listener, the witness, the believer. But you cannot unknow what you know. To have learned their language is to have learned the architecture of illusion. And no matter how beautifully the mask is painted, you now see the eyes behind. Do it. This seeing is irreversible. It does not mean you hate them, nor that you must love them in the way you once did. It means you can hold their image with clarity, both the shadow and the small frightened human. It conceals without losing the shape of yourself. In the unconscious, such a shift sends tremors. Dreams at this stage often carry themes of release. A birdcage door swinging open, a ship setting sail after long repair, a heavy coat being removed after a long winter. Sometimes you will dream of the narcissist not as an adversary, but as a fading figure on a distant shore, calling out words you cannot quite hear. This is the psyche's way of showing you that they no longer occupy the center of your inner theater. They are becoming a peripheral character, no longer the axis upon which your emotional life turns. Yet liberation is not a sudden burst of sunlight. It is a gradual clearing of the fog. You will still feel the echoes of the old pattern, but they will come as whispers, not commands. And when you hear them, you will recognize them instantly, as echoes of a language you now understand, but no longer need to speak. This is the true mastery to understand without being. Entangled to see without being drawn in. For the narcissist, your silence and clarity may provoke one final gambit. Some will attempt a grand gesture, an apology that feels almost real, a sudden claim of self-awareness, an appeal to the history you shared. These moments can be dangerous if the empath mistakes them for transformation. But your task now is to discern without cynicism, to acknowledge without surrender. You can meet these gestures with compassion, but also with unshakable truth that your past no longer loops back into theirs. And so the archetypal drama dissolves. The narcissist, deprived of the endless supply of emotional fuel, will seek new stages, new mirrors, new scripts. The empath, no longer an unguarded well from which others may drink freely, will walk on, not empty, but whole. The wound that once made you susceptible to this dance has been integrated, its edges softened by awareness, its steps transformed into a reservoir of strength. You have learned not only the narcissist language, but the language of your own soul. And this is a dialect no one can take from you. In this place, you begin to notice something unexpected: the absence of the narcissist's influence. Empath does not leave you in silence, but in a deeper dialogue with yourself. Your inner voice grows clearly, your dreams more vivid, your choices more deliberate. Relationships become less about filling a void and more about exchanging truth. And in this way, the very dynamic that once drained you has become the crucible in which your authentic self was forged. Jung would remind you that every shadow relationship is a teacher. Though the lessons may be costly, the narcissist taught you where your boundaries were fragile, where your need for recognition left you open, where your fear of abandonment could be exploited. But they also, without intending to, taught you the shape of your own resilience, the reach of your awareness, and the unbreakable nature of the self once it has been seen. This is the paradox. The one who sought to diminish you became the unwitting catalyst for your expansion. So when the narcissist realizes the empath has learned their language, they become aware of the fact that the empath is not just a passive listener, but a participant in the conversation as well. What they are truly realizing is that the game is over, not because you have defeated them in their own arena, but because you have stepped beyond it entirely. And in that step, you have entered the realm where no manipulation can follow, no mask can conceal, and no illusion can bind. And that perhaps is the greatest unspoken truth of all. When you step beyond the arena where the narcissist once held you, a curious stillness settles in your life. It is not the stillness of emptiness, but of reclaimed space, the quiet after the closing of a door that was always slightly ajar, letting in a cold draft you didn't know you were bracing against. This stillness is foreign at first, because so much of your psychic energy had been attuned to anticipating, decoding, and managing another's fluctuations. Without that constant demand, there is an unaccustomed expanse of awareness. At first it feels like absence, but as you breathe into it, you begin to realize it is presence. Your own presence filling the room of your life. Again, the narcissist, whether near or far, senses this absence of grip. They do not simply see it in your actions. They feel it in the subtle energetic current between you. You have withdrawn the invisible threads that once teased you to their moods and desires. This is not an act of hostility but of alignment. You are no longer speaking the old language reflexively, and while you can still understand, and it still recognize every inflection and implication, you choose when and if to respond. This choice is your liberation. You are no longer reacting. You are deciding in the archetypal field. This is a shift from the captive in the underworld to the one who has returned with the elixir. You have traversed the shadowlands, learned the customs of the realm, and come back not as the same innocent who first descended, but as a figure who carries both the memory of darkness and the wisdom it yielded. Jung might say, you have encountered the shadow in its rawest form and integrated what belongs to you, leaving the rest behind. This is the psychological gold of individuation, not purity, but wholeness. The narcissist's realization that you have learned their language is not only about fear of exposure, it is about the recognition that the unconscious bond has been severed. Their strategies no longer land, because you no longer inhabit the place in yourself that needed to respond to them. They cannot hook the wound that has been healed. And though they may try to adapt, their tools are designed for a different game, a game you no longer play. They can speak the same lines, but the stage is empty of the old actors, the script irrelevant to the person you have become. It is at this juncture that many empaths feel the temptation to test their newfound fluency to engage from a place of power rather than vulnerability. But here lies one of the most delicate psychological thresholds to resist turning the language of the shadow into an instrument of control. For if you do, the difference between you and the narcissist begins to dissolve. power in itself is not corrupting. Identification with power is your mastery lies in being able to hear every hidden motive, sense every maneuver, and still choose a path rooted in clarity rather than dominance. In dreams, this mastery often shows itself in subtle imagery. You may find yourself standing in a marketplace where once you were lost and disoriented, and now you move through it easily, recognizing every symbol on every stall. You know which merchants offer truth and which deal in illusion, but you no longer need to call them out or force their exposure. Your discernment is internal. You can walk past what does not serve you without the compulsion to confront it. This is a dream world's way of telling you that you are free for tea. Narcissist. This stage can be bewildering. They may cast you now as cold, unfeeling, or changed for the worse. These projections are not about you. They are about their inability to reconcile the you they once knew endlessly giving endlessly, available with a you who now stands in your own center to someone who equates love with control. Autonomy feels like abandonment, but you know now that it is the opposite. It is the only condition under which true connection could ever be possible, and so you walk with a new rhythm. Encounters with the narcissist, if they occur, are no longer storms, but weather patterns you can read before they form. You speak when you choose. You remain silent when you choose, and both are expressions of the same sovereignty. The deep undercurrent of your life is no longer defined by their tides. Your own inner compass has become the sole navigator, and it points steadily toward the unfolding of your authentic self. This is why Jung spoke so often of the necessity of relationship in the process of individuation. The other is a mirror in which we see what we cannot see alone. But the mirror is not meant to become a prison. The empath who has learned the Narcissi. Saint's language has also learned the most important lesson of all, how to listen to the language of their own depths. And in doing so, they have stepped into the realm where no one else can write their story. From here, the journey does not end. It expands. You begin to sense in others the subtle signs of unspoken languages, the hints of wounds and masks, but you meet them with a different energy now. Not the compulsive urge to heal, but the spacious presence that allows what is hidden to reveal itself or not. In its own time, you have nothing to prove, no rescue to enact. The healer within you has turned inward, tending the eternal dialogue between your conscious life and the vast mysterious unconscious that shapes it in some way, in the quiet of your own heart. You understand that even the narcissist with all their masks and fortresses was part of the soul's design. Without them, you might never have been compelled to descend into your own shadow, to learn its language, and to emerge fluent in the truths that cannot be unlearned. They were a chapter, not the whole book. And now you write the